Ready to change the carrier bearings on a 2022 Polaris General XP. The original ones, you can't grease them. Getting ready to put on the Super ATV Greaseable carrier bearings. Here's the rear shaft. When you take it out, they do come with a flat spot in the splines of the drive shaft. They'll only go back on one way, so you can see the flat spot there. But I did mark everything with a marker before I took it off. But anyways, here's the old carrier bearing housing. It's rubber, you cannot grease it. All these holes don't go to anything, it's just rubber. Here's the old bearing that comes out of them. It's got two little sleeves on either side. Just damaged where I beat it off the shaft. Here is the old bearing. One of the sleeves removed. You can see it is a sealed bearing, but you cannot grease it. It is a C&U brand. But it is pretty decent bearing. It's fully sealed. I work at a bearing manufacturer plant. Anyway, so that's the old stuff. Can't grease it. I'm putting on a 1/2-inch skid plate, and I never want to have to take it off again, so I'm putting greasable, serviceable bearings in it. Super ATV brand. Here's the bearing. Okay, there's the cap off. There's the grease fitting that goes in this channel, and it goes through the groove all the way around that bearing. And there's the grease holes, so it coats the whole thing on the inside. You shoot a couple pumps of grease every couple times you go riding. And the reason the outer race is curved on this is so it's self-aligning. So if your drive shaft goes up and down while you're moving, the outside race of that bearing can swivel around and move. Here's the drive shafts laid out. Here's the rear drive shaft, the mid drive shaft, and the upper drive shaft does not have a carrier bearing on it. It's still in the general. So the splines on the end can only go on one way, but I did mark them just to make sure I didn't screw anything up. Magic marker on the drive shaft. That way you can line it up. I'll show you. You can see how those splines got like a flat spot, so they can only go on one way. You can see it right there. And then it goes in that flat spot right there. But you can see I've got a marked where the flat spot is on front and back. There is the bearings on the shafts. Just get a hammer and beat the old bearing off. Comes off pretty easy. Get you a pipe or something that touches that inner race. You beat it on there with that green Loctite. Goes up against there. Then you'll install that collar right here to keep the bearing from sliding off. There's the Super ATV housing. There's the grease fitting. There's the grease groove right there. So when you pump grease in here, it goes around that groove and goes in the little holes right there and greases the bearing. Here's how I put the bearing on. So there's the bearing on. You can see a little bit of that green Loctite in there. I just used a pipe, found the pipe that will go over, and then it makes contact with that inner race. You don't want it touching the plastic seal or the outer race, only touching the inner race. So get your pipe on there. I put another piece of flat metal across here and beat it on right here. And I mean, it takes 20 or 30 whacks to get it down in there, but that's how you press the new bearing on. Okay, figured out something else. The collar will not go all the way up against the bearing. You see a gap right there. The collar, you can see it's chamfered right there. but that chamfer right there is longer than what's cut out. So it's got a washer, fits tight up against it, no movement. Collar slides up against it, and that'll help hold the inner race onto the shaft. We put that glue Loctite stuff on it, but this is just like a secondary mechanical hold so the inner race doesn't move on the shaft. Alright, got it in there, got it done. Let's go test it out. What's up, bud? So to take the drive shafts off, you first have to knock the pin out of the front on the front diff. I'll show you that right there. It is a pain to get to, but you knock it out, really hard to get out. Knock that pin off. The front drive shaft, you pull it backwards off the differential, then you push it all the way forwards, and then it takes the back of the front drive shaft off the middle drive shaft. So now we're on to the middle drive shaft. The middle drive shaft's got the 2 bolts on the housing holding the bearing on. Undo those 2 bolts, slide it forward, and it'll come off the rear drive shaft. Now the rear drive shaft, same thing. It's got a housing with 2 bolts. Undo those 2 bolts. Now this middle drive shaft, when you pull it forward off the rear one, you're going to slide it all the way back, and it comes out the bottom out of the back. And now the rear drive shaft, you pull it forward to come off the transmission, and then you slide it, and it comes out the back. Pretty easy to do. I've done this because I did not want to have to fool with the skid plate again, put a Super ATV 1/2-inch skid plate on it. I never wanted to have to pull it off again to change the carrier bearing since they're non-greasable, so that's why I ordered the greasable ones. And this is where I put my grease fittings for the drive shafts. So you buy the little extender grease kit for the greasable carrier bearings, and I'll put that up on the screen. The grease fitting I put is right here in the floorboard. Right there out of the way, and that's how you grease the front carrier bearing. And I put the back grease fitting back here in this passenger, so it's out of the way, and that's how you grease the middle drive shaft and the rear carrier bearing and the front carrier bearing.